Welcome to Lesson 5 in the WPF with MVVM add-on course. In this lesson, we're going to wire up the Create Team form. This lesson is going to start getting into how you want to tweak our user interface to take advantage of WPF. In WinForms, we would just open up a new window for every time we need a new form. Now, we'll be opening up new controls inside existing windows. That means we need to change layouts a bit and get more creative in how we display our controls. I'm not sure about you, but I think that sounds fun. So let's we'll have the selected teams, so teams are already selected to be in the tournament, as well as the remove button, and this drop down here for create or adding a team, and also a link to create a new team. That all goes here. But then if we say create a new team, I want to replace this column's information with the add team control. So we'll hide this list box for right then, as well as the other things like selection and removing and all the rest. We'll hide all that and instead show the create team control here. When we either cancel or create the team, then we will close that out and display this again with that new team added. The same is true for the prizes. They'll be in the third column. And I'll say, okay, here's the list of prizes you've selected, as well as the Create Prize button. When you select Create Prize, it replaces this and the button with the Create Prize form, which we've already created. When you create the prize, or if you cancel, what's going to happen is it's going to close out, and if you create a prize, it's going to put a prize in this box. So that's really all there is to our layout that's different. And that doesn't seem like a big deal except for the hiding and showing. But it really is a definite twist on how we're thinking about forms. And the reason I share that is because that kind of design plays into how we create this form. You see, this form is essentially what I would call two columns wide. A column here and a column here. But over here, I want it to be just one column wide. Otherwise, it's going to make this form very, very wide. And I don't want that. So therefore, I want to crush this down or collapse it down into one column high. Well, the easiest thing to do for that is this right here, the add new team member. If we were to take that out and put the list underneath here, right where this is, we'd have just one column. And if we did that, then if we wanted to create a new team member, we could replace this list with this form, just like we're going to do over here when we have our list of teams, or we replace it with this control. So hopefully you follow that. Essentially what we're going to do is change the layout of this form and also turn this into a separate control. So we'll actually tackle this control in the next lesson. But for now, what we're going to do is create this form in one column with team name, select team members, add member, and the list box, along with remove selected and the create team button. And like I said, in the next lesson, we'll tackle this area right here. So with that being said, what we're going to do is create the create team view model and create team view. Right click on our view models, say add, class, and we'll call this create team view model. Now, notice there's one difference here so far. We have the create prize form view model and the create team view model. I'm thinking I don't want to say form for my create prize. I kind of want to not have it that wordy. So let's actually change this. So I'll click on it twice in order to have the editor come up. I'll take the form out and I'll say, yes, I want to rename this everywhere. That renames it here, and it also renames it in my shell view model where I actually call it. But don't forget, you also have to rename your view as well. The nice thing is that's not a lot of changes to make in order to rename out both our form and our view model. The other thing I want to change while we're here is in my view model, I left the background of white on. So let's turn that off. That was just for us to see it easier when we're actually making the edits. If we were to run this, we'll get build errors. Let's hit no and find out what the build errors are. Cannot find create prize form.xaml. So let's find out where that is. So let's pull up our error list again and look at it, and it says it's trying to find it in the shellview.xaml. So let's go to shellview.xaml. That's where we are right now. And let's look to see where it's looking for that create prize view model. We have the active item, and that's fine. And if we go over to our, just to make sure, in our active item right here, we have our create prize view model. That's great. So those two are fine. But let's look at our create prize view, not view model. And we'll see here create prize form view. So let's actually change that to be create prize view. We hit no. We still have an error. Initialize component does not exist. So if we were to look behind the view, there's actually a code behind. And we can change this create prize form view to create prize view. And now we have to change again the constructor because the constructor doesn't match the class name. There we go. And hopefully that should solve it. We'll see in just a minute. The key here is just to keep going. It's thinking. There we go. All right. So it is a little more complicated than just as far as renaming than just doing those two things. You have to do a couple more and track it down. The hard thing, especially with MVVM, is things aren't really connected. So at the design time in the editor, it doesn't know about all the different renames that need to happen. So you have to kind of follow through and rename. It's actually not, it shouldn't be a problem. So if you were to rebuild the solution, it should be that it clears up that error. And if not, we'll come back to it. But it's not actually throwing an error, even though it says it's an error. Otherwise, it wouldn't compile. It's one of those wacky things that happens sometimes. All right, let's open back up our create team, close everything else out. That way we're back to where we started. Open up our Solution Explorer. We can minimize the tracker UI. We've created the create team view model. We need to make it public. And with the create prize, we inherited from shell, but instead here we want to inherit from conductor. We need a control dot for the using caliber and micro, and then just of type object. To change from create prize view model to create team view model. That way when we start this up for debugging purposes, it will show the create team. And I am going to do the view instead of the view model first, just because I kind of like that more. So stack panel, orientation is vertical, and we're not going to worry about anything as far as the grids, column, and rows. We're just going to stack this vertically. Now, again, for our template, we have create team, and then team name, select team member. So let's start with our text block. Don't need to give it a name. We will give it a font size. I'm not sure what the font size was. I think it was 24. We'll start there. We can always modify it. Font size. Team name. And at this point, I'm just throwing stuff on the page. Let's create our background of white so you can see it a little better. I'm just throwing stuff on the page here. I'm not worrying about layout too much. I can tweak that in a minute. And usually the places that I stop to tweak is once I get through this kind of section where I repeat it again, I will figure out what to do to tweak here. And then that way I'm ready to do it down here as well. So that's kind of my pattern. It's up to you how you do it. Text box. And we will give it a name. And this is the team name. And actually we can do a self-closing here. There we go. So there's the text box right there. Now again, that's crushed up pretty good. Not what I want. I also don't want it to be right up against the edge. So just like with our create prize view, where we put the margin of 10 pixels on the bottom for the create prize, we'll do the same exact thing. In fact, I'll copy it. And I will do the same thing here. There we go. So now we have a margin down below. And then for our, on this one, we did a grid because we did them next to each other. But we're not doing that on our create team. And the reason why is because place number, that's a number. It won't be very high. It probably won't ever be 2 digits. Even if it is, it won't be 3. Place name, maybe if you got into huge places, but essentially you're going to do first and second place. Those are short. Prize amount, not going to be a big number. Prize percentage, it's a 2-digit number. maybe 3 if you do 100%. So these boxes can be very small and still not overflow. Whereas the team name could be fairly long. So we're going to stack them. But what that means is we don't need this grid, and we don't need to have a 10 pixel between the label and the text box in the horizontal, but we do want that 5 pixels on each side in order to match up the create prize. So let's do that. Let's put a margin on our create team and say margin equals, and we'll say that left and right is 5 pixels, and actually we'll say left is 5 pixels, top is 0, right is 5, and bottom, and let's start with 5 and see how it looks. All right, and we'll do the same thing with our text box. So there's our same margin. And yes, yell at me because I actually accidentally got the close in there. So there we go. So now if we look at this, we see that they line up and they've got a little bit margin and it's a little bit of space between. I think that space is probably fine. We might be able to get away with not having it. Something like that, really put it right on top. But I kind of like to have a little bit of a space there. But that does mean I want a space below this one that's a little more significant. So instead of 5, I'm going to want 10. So now that we have our pattern for our text block and text box, let's actually just copy this. And I'll paste it right below. And this will actually be a combo box, and it will be the select team members. So we'll call this the select team members. And we'll make this a combo box. And I'm actually going to change that name. I'm not a big fan of select because that's actually an action. Select is doing something. So how about we say available? Available team members. And we will have the label still say select team member. All right. Now those labels, we might want to make them bold. We'll see. But for right now, I think that's fine to do. We also might want to put a colon at the end to indicate that refers to what's below it. Again, we'll see about that. For right now, I think it's okay. So going back to our design, we now have this button below here that says add that member. Now the one adjustment I want to make is we have this remove selected over here on the right, and that's fine when you have a lot of horizontal space, but when we're working on collapsing this down to one column, I could do better than this. So let's move this button to the left. We'll have add member and remove member, and they'll be next to each other. So let's do both of those, add member and remove member. Oomph to them, I guess you could say. So padding, let's just do 10 all around. Let's actually make that 5. It's a little big to have 10. There we go. That seems reasonable. And we'll do the same thing with the other one. Now the other thing I want to do, and let's minimize this, is I want to center these and maybe give a little space in between them. So first, to center them, that's pretty easy. Horizontal alignment equals center. Now that puts both buttons in the center. That's on a stack panel, not on an individual button. And then to put some space in between here, I could either add it on one button or both, I want to add on both. That way they're still centered on the page. So I'm going to add a margin. And if you're not familiar with margin versus padding, margin is the outside of this button. Padding is on the inside. So I'm going to add a margin of 0 for the left, 0 for the top. Let's do 5 for the right and 0 for the bottom. Notice how that moves it over. Now I cannot copy and paste that. I need to do a new one. And here's why. It's 5 for the left, 0 for the top, 0 for the right, and 0 for the bottom. Because I want to have the margin to be on the left side of this button and the right side of this button. Now, they're still centered overall in this box, and yet they have a space in between them. Now notice remove member is a little bigger than add member, and so there is a little bit of an offset there, but that's okay. I think in my book, if you really want to do something different with that, you could, but I'm fine with that. I don't want to hard code the size of the button. I'd prefer not to do that. If you really wanted to do something where you had both the same size, what you could do is instead of a stack panel, make it a grid and then have 2 columns that were both size star. That way they'd be the same size as each other, and then you could put the buttons inside there. You could left and right align them. It's a whole process. For me, that's good enough. So now we have our add member and remove member, and they're named. So that way we're sending it one direction. Whenever you select something, it will get sent down to our view model. And now we have our display member path. There we go. And this is going to be the name, the property name of our property inside of our team, which off the top of my head, I can't remember. And so I can go to let's go to the code behind for this. So that's F7. And we can see, let's see down here where we have the create team. We create the person. That's not it. Add member, person model, remove member. There we go. Create team, team model. I hit F12 on this. And it says, okay, there's team name is one of the properties. So that's fine with me. The only problem is that's not the right one. I don't want a team because it's not a team that I'm selecting. It's a person. So in the person model, there we go. First name, last name, email address. I do have full name. So let's grab that. Always make sure you know which property you're talking to. So in my create team XAML, I want to say for the selected team member, I want the full name to display. So it's going to say Tim Corey in here as a person to add to this team. All right, so we've got this, 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 and this. We just need to add this list box and also the create team button. So down below our stack panel, we need to have a list box. It will give it a name, and we'll say this is the selected team members. Next, we'll go ahead and add the selected item. Selected item. Actually, I'm going to put this in the line below just because it's going to take up so much space. So selected item, we'll do binding, path equals selected team member to remove. Now the reason this is going to select a team member to remove is because when you select something in the list box, you can hit the remove member and it'll remove that person from the list box. So that's why that is called to remove. And then the mode, we're actually going to have a two-way mode right here because we'll be adding and removing, and we'll add it from here and we'll remove from here. It's just, we'll keep it two-way. All right, and then we can actually close this out, but up here, I'm going to add our display member path. And that's going to be full name. And the other thing I want to do is add some kind of padding to this so that we have that 5 pixel on each side. So let's do that. We'll add padding. We'll do 5 space 0. So it's 5 pixels on the right and left, 0 on top and bottom. And then we'll also do our margin. And I messed that up. Let's go back. It's not padding, it is margin. So there we go. Now if I look at it, I see there's a little space there. It's hard to see, but it's there. So now I want 5 on the left, but the top, I want to have at least 10. And then I want to have 5 on the right. And let's leave 0 at the bottom for now. We could add more at the bottom if we want to. Now I'm looking at this going, do I need to have above this some sort of, here's the people in the team so far, or selected team members, or something like that to indicate that doesn't seem right. It seems like this should be 5 and then 10. 10 at the bottom, 5 on the right. We want 5 on both sides, which means that these as well are incorrect. So let's change this. 5 and 0. I'm sorry, and 10. And 5 and 10. So it looks like all of these have a margin on the right that was incorrect. So we've changed all these now. And now we should be good on this text box. So let's just see here. So we can say this is called, notice these all moved over a little bit, and that's good. This one is called the selected team members. And we're going to want to have a margin at the top for this. Let's get a margin of 10 to move it down. So now we have our selected team members. It looks like our list box, that has a margin of 10 at the top. We don't want that. So let's give that a margin of 0 to move it back up underneath selected team. And I'm not necessarily convinced we even want a 10 here. You might want just 5. So we could look at that and play around with it. I'm not going to spend too much time tweaking this stuff. If you want to mess with it, that's fine. It's really up to you. All right, and the last thing we need is we need to have, we've got our display mirror path, we've got our selected item. So list box is done, but now we need that button. in order to add our create or to have our create team button. So let's say button, and the margin on this, well actually let's do a name first. This is create team. And the margin on this should be 5 on the left, 10 up top, 5 on the right, and let's make sure we have at least 5 at the bottom. And we're going to call this the create team button. And then we'll also add some padding in here. And we'll say that we need to have at least 5 pixels of padding all the way around, which makes the overall button a little bigger. All right, so that's our form. Notice the stack or the list box doesn't have anything in it really yet, and so it's very, very small. In fact, it's almost not even there. We might want to give it a minimum size in order to have something here. So we could say minimum height and say it must be 20 pixels high, just to have something there to start with. And with minimum, the nice thing is you're not really hard coding a number. You're not saying it has to be this size all the time. It's only if it's empty or if it's very, very small, it'll at least be this size, but it can grow bigger. So I like this. I think this works for us. And I like this overall layout. The add member, and I will paste it in. And I will say that the name is create. And I'll say create. This is getting a little squished, and that's okay. But notice how we have some issues here with our margin. But if I take margin out entirely, notice how the margin is now correct. And the reason why is because add member has a margin to the right. Remove member has a margin to the left. That takes care of create member entirely. We don't need to add more margins. And it is nicely formed in this space. And don't forget this is actually 150% of the form size as it is normally. So this is a really compact form. It'll grow a little taller as we add members to the list, but for right now, it's pretty compact. So here's what we're going to do about the create new person area. I'm going to leave it alone for this video. We're not going to worry about it in this lesson. Instead, we're going to leave it just like this and not do anything with create member. Instead, we'll deal with the add member, remove member, and populate this other information. We won't wire up a create team quite yet, but we'll have it in place. Then, once we create the other form, then we'll be able to wire these two together so they play nicely and have the create person form kind of fill in this spot versus the team list. So we'll do that in future lessons, but for right now, we're just going to wire up this and not worry about having to replace this quite yet. I've got a plan for it, but I don't want to All right, so there's team name, that's done. Now we do the combo box for our selected team member, available team members. And remember, that's a binding list. So I'll copy the name. And down here we'll say prop full. And it's a binding list. I'm sorry, bindable. There we go, bindable collection. And it would be of type person model. And we'll call it available team members, only I'll change that to be lowercase and a. Available team members. Remember, those are people. And then we'll do our control dot here to add the using statement for our person model to come in. And again, we will set our set to have that notify a property change. Actually, we don't need to for a bindable collection. Don't worry about it. Leave it the way it is. Okay, I will move this up so they're together. And I'll collapse down this to one less space and shrink these down. So now I have two properties. I have the team name and the available team members. I do need to have the selected team member to add. So let's create that. And this would be a person model. Select. And I did the prop, not prop full. It's such a habit. Prop full. And that would be person model. Now let's paste that in because it's just easier than typing it. And there we go. And now I'll add my notify of property change. There we go. So far, so good. We have our 3 bound up. Now we need the list box down here. Then we'll come back and wire up our 4 or create our 4 methods. So our list box down here, we can select it and it takes us right to it. And that's called selected team members. So again, it's the same style. So let's move that up. We'll get rid of the extra space. We'll collapse this down. And we'll say this is a prop full. And it's a bindable collection. And it's of type person model. And the name is selected team members. It's underscore S. And there we go. And again, we will move this one up. I did that wrong. Go back. Let's move this up like so. There we go. Or at least trying to. And I'm going through and verifying and double checking every piece that I'm doing. So I should have 5 properties. 1 for this one, 2 for this one, and 2 for this one. If I come over here, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 properties. So that's good. Now I need 4 methods. I need the add member, create member, remove member, and create team. So that's pretty simple to do. let's do a public void add member. We'll start off with just empty methods for now. I'll actually just copy this. No, I wouldn't even copy a method or definition for a method, but it really is pretty simple and pretty straightforward. Remove, and we have one more, and this is create team. So there's 4 methods here: create team, add member, create member, remove member. Now, we could wire up something so they can't remove a member if it's the selected member is null. We could add something here. They can't add something until they selected a team member. So we could do that if you wanted to, or we could ignore it. It's really up to you if you want to get that granular. I don't necessarily care to, just because it seems like an extra step or an extra bit of work to do for not a lot of gain, especially for these 3 buttons. But at the same time, it does kind of look neat when these are disabled until you select something and they're enabled. So we could add it if we want. So pretty easy to do for all of these. So we could say public bool add member. And let's make it can add member. Oops. There we go. And in which case we want to pass in with a can add member, we needed to have selected a team member to add. So if we pass this in as a person model, and make it lowercase, not uppercase, there we go. And then pass that again to our can add member and say return selected team member to add double equals null. And so what that's going to do is return true if it's null, which actually is not what we want to do. We want to return false. So if they've not yet selected a team member, they can't click add member, therefore it will be false. This will return false. Otherwise, if they have selected somebody, they can add them. So it will be true, therefore it enables the button. Now before we go any further, we can actually test this functionality, because it should be that the button is grayed out since nothing is selected because nothing is in the drop-down list. So let's run this and just see if it actually even works to this point. And in fact, it does work. So we have to expand this a little bit. There we go. But now our add member is grayed out because nothing is selected in this list. Now the same should be true for remove member. So let's do that as well. We can test that right after we're done as well. Public bool can remove member. It will pass in again a person model, and this time it will be from the selected team member to remove. And we'll change it to a lowercase s. And in this one, what we need to do is check to make sure we have a team name. That's right up here. So we'll pass that in. Let's start with that. And we'll also want to check the bindable lists for available team members and selected team members. Now that's a bit trickier. This is a bindable collection, and I've not found a good way of passing that in to a method for the can add member. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to take this away. We're going to take this away. And in fact, we're going to take away these parens as well. And instead make this into a getter in here. So basically a property. Now it's a read-only property. We're just going to have a get. We're not going to have a set. And then what we'll do is we'll say if team name dot length is greater than 0 and available team members dot count is greater than 0 and selected team members dot count is greater than 0. Return true. Now I could have put that right in line, but I decided not to. Now return false if something in here is not selected. And actually I don't need to have the available team members, just the selected team members. So you have to have somebody selected in the teams and you have to have a team name. Those are the two criteria for creating a team. Now the only problem I see right off the bat is the selected team members. When we first set it up, selected team members, it doesn't get initialized. It won't get initialized until our constructor. So this check might happen before then. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to wrap the whole thing. So where's my surround with? I don't see it. I hate when I don't have surround with. I'm going to cut this out and say if selected team members does not equal null. Do those if statements. But if it's null, what does that mean? We have nobody selected. If the list is null, there's nobody selected. Therefore, return false as well. So that way, it should stand up even to a null list or an uninitialized list. Now, at this point, probably again, you've been screaming at me for the past 5 minutes, and that's okay. It's one of those things where I've been trying to keep track of too many things ahead in a schedule and not enough paying attention to what I'm doing right now. If you hadn't noticed, this is the can add member, not the create team, can create team. So I already messed up the can add member method. So I'm going to copy this, and then I'm going to start doing Control Z. That's one way of getting around it. I can just keep backing up. There we go. So now we can add the member, that's fine. We can remove the member, that's fine. But it's the team down here that I want to change. So let's change this to the, instead of can add member, can create team. Now my code's all the same, that's good. I don't need to pass anything into can create or create team. So now my logic should be sound for can I create a team. But I changed this to be a property, but now I need to flag this whenever I have a change. So what I need to do is add a notify for this value, this property, whenever the selected team members changes or the team name changes. So up here under team name, right here, we have notify of property change for team name. Let's also do a notify of property change for our can create team. I'll copy that entire line. Now, in the selected team members, I actually have to add our first notify. There we go. So now it'll notify of can create team. Let's run this. And right now you notice that the create team is not enabled, which is good. Now I can't enable it because even if I put values here, I can't actually add somebody to the list yet. Therefore, there's nothing really I can do yet to satisfy our list of people. Therefore, when we come over to our code behind for this, we need to create a constructor, CTOR and tab twice. Now in here at the beginning, what we can do is say for available team members, actually we want to use the actual property, not the private backing field. Available team members equals global config.connection.get person underscore all. Add the using statement for that. And now it's going to yell at us again. And it says, I can't implicitly convert from one type to another. Remember that? Well, no problem. We can cut this out. And we can say available team members equals new bindable collection and pass in the initialization of that list. In theory, that's all we need to do. Let's run this and make sure that we actually have people in our list because our database does have people. Check that out. So now we have people in our list. Now the interesting thing is we can't yet add a member. So you got to figure that out. Because in theory, now you've selected somebody, that person should be available to then add to our list of selected team members. So let's find out why that's not actually binding the way it should. The first way, and this can be difficult at times to make sure you get right, so it takes some trial and error, but let's figure it out together. So can add member, that's what you need to do. Selected team member to add is not equal to null. Well, let's see here if when we select in our combo box, we're adding to selected item is selected team member to add. That looks right. One way of source, that seems okay. So it seems like we are selecting somebody. So here's what we're going to do. Member should say selected team members dot add selected team member to add. But let's breakpoint it right here and see if it actually works. Let's actually take the breakpoint off for a minute just to see if it actually works, and then I'll come back and put the breakpoint if it doesn't work. All right, and it throws an error for us, and it says a null reference exception. Now this is in the can create team, which is saying, can you create a team yet? Meaning, do we have selected team members and do we have a team name? It got past the selected team members is not equal to null, and I said if team name dot length, and it says team name dot length through an error. So team name is actually null. Well, we didn't initialize team name, so we need to figure that out. But selected team members, the count is 0, so that would work. So let's go back and initialize our team name. There we go. It's now an empty string. If we run this again, it should work. And we now have, we expand this out a little bit, add member is available. Don't get too excited. That's just because we disabled the check for can add member. But let's take Tim Corey and say add member. I saw that move, but nothing else really happened. So let's go ahead and come down to our add member and put our breakpoint. And then we'll open back up our app and say Joe Smith add member. If we mouse over our selected member to add, it's null. So that's a problem. We're not passing in properly, or we're not actually populating properly the selected team member to add. So let's look at our selected team member to add. If we mouse over it, it actually has all the values. Now, remember I said that when we pass in these values, it creates a copy? The problem is that only works well for value types. And this is not a value type. And a value type is like a string or an int, actually not a string, an int or a double or a decimal. It does work for string, but string is not actually technically a value type. But it doesn't work so well with objects. Now there may be a better way of doing this that I'm not aware of. But I do know that in add member, I can just use the full property, like so. And then I'll just change this right here, because that was a problem, it was null. I'll change this right here to be a public property as well, and that way I can trigger this to update as a notify of property change whenever the selected team member to add has been updated. So first, let's just verify this will work, and then we'll go on to modifying this one, and we'll have to modify this as well for remove. So we run this, we expand it out. I'll select Tim and say add member. Now Tim shows up. Sue shows up. Joe and Joe shows up. Now the one thing that I did in the WinForm application is when I added somebody to the list, I also removed them from the other list. So let's do that. Let's say available team members dot remove selected team member to add, like so, and let's verify that works. So now we can expand this out a little bit. We can say Tim Corey add member. Notice it's blanked out because Tim Corey is no longer in this list. Sue Storm, and again it blanks out, and again Sue's not in this list anymore. So that's working the way we want it to. So now let's re-enable this Boolean. So we will uncomment this. We'll take away the method portion of it. We're going to cut this out and instead have a get here. And we're going to return if the selected team member to add is not null. So now if the selected team member to null add is not null, return true. If it is null, return false. it's again disabled. So now we've got this really kind of cool working form where it adds and subtracts as necessary. So that's kind of cool. Now we need to change down here where we have the can remove and remove, because this isn't going to work. So again, we will take this out. I'll make it capital for right now and cut it out. Put a get and return selected team member to remove for can remove. And we'll also take this and come up here for a selected team member to remove. Do a notify of property change here. And now that should work as well. We can verify this works once we wire up the remove member. So let's take out this right here. We don't need to have anything passed in. And instead we can say the available team members add selected team member to remove. So let's add him to the available first because we removed him up here when we selected him. And then we'll say the selected team members remove selected team member to remove. So we're adding them back to the available list, taking him out of the selected team members list, and that should refresh everything. So now we're all wired up as long as it works, except for the create member and the create team. Let's just try it, make sure that so far it works, and then we'll get into the next step. So let's give it a team name. It's team test. We're going to add, notice create team down here. Add, it still says nothing for create team. So we need to change that. But if I add a couple, remove is not highlighted. Now it is highlighted. Sue is not in this list right now. If I click that, now Sue is the bottom of this list. So the add remove does work, but our create team is permanently, it seems, disabled. So let's figure out why it's disabled. So the logic looks right. If the selected team members is not null, meaning there is name, both calling this can create team. So here's what we're going to do to debug it. We're going to come down here. The first thing I'm going to do, I'm just going to run this. I'm going to go in opposite order that I did last time, because sometimes order matters. So if this isn't properly telling the create team to do something when it's being updated, maybe if I do this and it is telling it properly, then it would refresh. And notice if I type T, that highlights, which means that the team name is properly flagging when it's being updated, but the selected team members list is not flagging to check as well. So we can come back over here to our selected team members right here. Now, this should work because we have called the can create team. And since it knows about this, it should work, but here's what we can do. We could further diagnose this. My guess is it has something to do with a different property relating or relying on binding to this when we're not actually modifying the whole list, we're just adding a member. So direct connection to this works, but probably indirect might not. So we could spend time debugging this, but the reality is, if we take this line right here, and whenever we remove someone, so whenever we come down here to add member or remove member, we just add that notify of property change to our method. That should trigger as well. If we run this now, and we say, let's start with a team name, and say Tim Corey add member, now it successfully says, yes, that's a valid team. We don't have to go the opposite direction because it knows that we have at least one person. If I select this person and say remove member, it's no longer a valid list of team members, therefore we cannot create the team. So that works. So a little tweak like that, I wouldn't overly stress about why it's not working exactly the way you want it to. It probably is something that's just kind of an inherency of using this notification. But if you really want to look into it, go ahead. At this point, it's 2 lines of code that I have to add. Not a big deal for me. Now let's look at the button for create team. So this create team does these things and then closes the form, including telling its calling form, its parent, that we're complete. So let's do these steps at least, and then we'll worry about, we'll just add to do for right now to pass the team up the line. So let's close this out. We'll come back over here and we'll say, okay, in our create team, we want to do those 4 steps. Create team model. Of course, these aren't right, but that's okay. We can collapse these down or just we just copy the values from right here. So team name, and then the team members would be this right here. But it's going to yell at us because team members is a bindable collection. But we can say to list, and now it'll work to go right into team members. And we just say create team. We're good to go. The only thing we need to do is add our to do down here to pass the team back to the parent and close the form. So this is all wired up. I'll leave this alone. I won't touch it because I know that this should work because we've already tested it in the other form. And I didn't really change anything. So I'm not going to stress about that at this point. I'll wait until I have the whole create team or create tournament form running. That means that right now, this form is complete except for the create member and replace in this section. And that means this lesson is done. We can move on to the next lesson, which is where we actually have the create person form. And then after that, we'll take that form and put it in this place right here when we click create member. So coming up next, we'll deal with the create person form.